Hello, and welcome to another discussion of Destiny's Conflict. This is the 10th book in the Wars of Light and Shadow series by Janny Wurts. This is the last book before we get to read the last book in the series called
The
The Song
penultimate,
of
some people
Mystery.
might say that.
No, Chris, I will say it the way I said it.
Okay.
Don't give me shorter words when I can
The,
say longer
the last
sentences.
book before the last book. Very succinctly. If Johnny has taught you anything about wordplay, it's coming out right now.
Yep. Oh.
This is reparations for you messing about my order yesterday in this week.
So, all right. So the last book before the last book. I will not change how I say that. Did I already say this is the final discussion? This is the final of the final discussion of this book.
Except there's a final discussion with Johnny coming up.
That is true. So this is the last discussion before the last discussion for this book.
Oh man.
We're talking chapters. If you're still here, thank you. But chapters 11 through 30 is what we're talking about today. Starting with Black Dawn. A lot happens. It's a very exciting ending that we're very excited to discuss. But first, everyone here, except Chris, will introduce themselves. And Jared, could you start?
Wow.
Yes,
Yes, I will try. I am the Fantasy Thinker at the Fantasy Thinker YouTube channel, and so you can find me there, and you can find me on Speculative Speculation Podcast and some other fine podcasts on pagechewing.com.
GB Poe? He's just like muted himself in protest. I don't want to be a part of this group.
I was gonna be like, yeah, I was actually gonna unmute and be like, I refuse to introduce myself and then mute again, but I won't do that. I'm Hugo. I've read all these books, and you're all Johnny Come Latelys, so I know everything.
You know everything, and Chris.
I was going to say just call me Davian, but I think you're the betrayer of our shit. I'd be Caradmon in this case, the kind of stickler for the things being said right and done right and that kind of stuff. So yeah, Chris from the Chronicle of Chris YouTube channel. There we go.
That was short. Okay, so chapters. Before I forget, what was briefly referred to in those introduction shenanigans, we will have a live stream with Janny in 2 weeks from now, but you don't know when we are recording. So July 13th is Sunday at 1 p.m. Pacific. We'll have the link up for that, and whatever burning questions we have from this arc. The Sword of the Canon, which was Initiate's Trial and this book. We will get an opportunity to chat with Janny about that. Please check that out if you're interested. Now we can talk about Black Dawn, which, if I remember correctly, starts with Arathorn returning to find Vivette, and they go on the run together, somewhat unsuccessfully.
Yeah, I was going to say they tried to.
Yeah.
Well, it was interesting because Dakar sensed Arathorn's return, and there was a really cool piece of prose on 431, I believe it is, when Dakar was talking to Terrans, and he was talking about Jarrett's, because Terrans has Jarrett's memories, and he was talking about Jarrett's hatred of the fanatics carried the septic sting of experience, and I love that alliteration in that line, and just the meaning behind that, how his hatred has become septic for these fanatics for the true sect and stuff like that. So I thought it was just beautifully put there, and Yeah, and we get so he senses Arathon's release, and we get more prophecy from Dakar here in this section.
So Dakar has had a lot of visions in this book, and we don't quite know what he sees, just the consequences. I think in this case, I believe there's two aspects. One, that he basically has given up that anything can be saved at this point.
Mhm.
And the thing that cannot be saved is the fellowship's compact, which means that we are potentially leading up to the destruction of humanity unless, but Arathon has some decision making to do that could potentially prevent this, right? This is these are the stakes that we're playing with here.
Yeah, it sort of feels, especially this book, I think it's been prevalent through actually a lot of the books, is this idea of scrying foretelling what happens, and it's sort of foretelling the direction of travel, if you know what I mean. But this book, I think, more so than any of the other one, seems to, even the people that are doing the scrying and the prophecy and that kind of stuff, are less inclined to believe that it's exactly how it'll play out. If you know what I mean, there's less. Do you know when in some cases, like Warhost, for instance, where Dakar takes very personal, immediate action to save the arrow, right? In this case, we definitely get a sense from Dakar, but from others, I think as well, in general, about the general direction of the scrying and the prediction, and basically saying, look, events will play out as events will play out. You know, we don't really feel like interfering will change things, or otherwise we sort of have to trust in the process and trust in the individuals that are in play here. And I think that really comes out quite a lot in these three chapters, especially as we get towards the end. But I think generally throughout the whole book, because as you say, Varsha, there's been less kind of emphasis on I seen this thing, I leading the reader to kind of say, oh, I'm waiting for this thing. And a lot more of, we could see that Dakar seen something, but we seen the reaction of his face that it wasn't good, but we never got any detail, that kind of stuff. So that happens quite a lot. So I think it's how it uses prophecy here is quite different and quite interesting, I think, because it definitely feels towards the end that we just trust in the process as well as the reader to kind of say, look, even if I knew what was going to happen, like if you foretell that Arthur will die, I don't think it would change my opinion that, but something else will go on. And I think Janny
Yeah.
sort of trusts the reader in that way to know that that's going on without sort of leading that out.
Yeah. There's it's also somewhat interesting because I think if I remember correctly, all of these visions he's had fainting spells for, which means that they will definitely come to pass, right? And I think we're really told that for the first time in this or the previous book. We knew about it before because of talking to maybe Chibipo and Janny, but I think this was the first time he told us that, like, if I faint, then there's absolutely no changing it. But there seems to be a certain branching aspect to the vision, if it makes sense, because a parent, like, they do say at some point that Arathon's decisions are what the outcomes hinge on, which means that he's had a vision that if Arathon makes these decisions, then something will happen, as opposed to this will definitely happen because of the fainting spell. You know, that was interesting too, that there's the like the aspect of that prophetic element hasn't changed, but it has a bit of uncertainty to it still, which like leaves room for manipulation. I think that was nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, they even mentioned that Davian, when he let Alara go.
Well, he did and he didn't, because he basically tried to cajole her into thinking very clearly about her decision. And, you know, if I'm keeping you here, certainly, but I'm also offering your protection. You'll not have that protection if you leave here, etc. So it wasn't so much like the way they referred to it later on. Said, look, Davian said, away you go, open the door. It wasn't quite of that ilk.
Well, it said Alara might believe she slipped Davian's protection through her own initiative, but no fellowship sorcerer dared to grant her liberty if aught in the world suggested she might upset his grace's doomed fate. So it wasn't Yeah, and so she she knows that. She says Davian has allowed me to go because Ettenmere's shamans have already triumphed. So that had to deal with that whole situation that
Yeah.
Arathon was in. Yeah.
And it also seems that the predicted doom is of some aspect of the downfall, but not the conclusion of those events, right? Do I remember correctly that he had a similar vision about his capture by Salidi the second time over?
Oh, yeah.
And it was his downfall, but then he was able to escape from that. And same now, it seems, with the Etenmere shamans, because he probably saw him being captured, and that means we're done. But then he was able to escape. I think he met an adept person.
A fallen apt adept, right?
Mm, I thought so. Like someone from that area, right? A previously dead,
Yes.
not from a
Yep.
different hostel. Yeah, I couldn't figure that out. I was listening to that
From
bit
the
on audiobook. But
I think it was from the fallen hostel in the Ettenmere
Oh, yes, that one was on the ley
region,
line. Yeah.
and
mm.
that's who, because he was trapped by the shamans, but he then he talked to the Ath Adept, the fallen Ath Adept,
Mhm.
because they had descended from our sorrowfully fallen, is what he told him, and severed from the prime source.
Hmm.
That's the shamans are severed from the prime source, and that's what the adept was telling him. And with the adept's help, he got loose. He overcame. Correct.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
Sorry, I thought you were saying something else. But yes, that did happen. The and I love that conversation between Arathon and the adept. I guess first finding the trust to talk to them, and then realizing what they are and the choices that they're given. I think I forget why he. Oh yeah, he wanted revenge, and the adept said, "Don't do it. Just do the other thing that might
Mhm.
serve you better." He's like, "Nope. I gotta go back and show them some stuff."
Yeah, yeah. For sweet satisfaction, leave that
Yeah.
part to me.
But I thought it was interesting again if you compare the Admir shamans, the Coriathian, the True Sect, etc. They all have sort of twisted personal forms of their ideology, if you know what I mean, to some end. Like they do not have, like the Fellowship and the Compact, the bigger saving humanity as a goal. The very personal goals, even though their kind of outland goals are the bigger aims, are sort of linked, if you know what I mean. They're there to protect Ethera and the world and all of that kind of stuff, but they've all sort of twisted it in some way, and obviously it plays out against the True Sect in the long game here. But I think even the Epmere shamans have that kind of idea of what their the twisting of what their role in society and the reason that they live in secrecy versus upholding their way of life, or what they think. They sort of get the two things conflated as being, you know, as important as each other and the same thing, whereas they don't really, because if they did, then Arathon's, what do you say, his promise or his thing wouldn't have been enforced in quite the same way, you know,
Hmm.
that it would have. You know, I think that it's interesting to contrast all of those factions, and I'm sure we can go back through many other factions, and probably goes back to Cossack even, and his idea. I mean, he's earlier on in the book, he was trying to protect his people, but again, he has
Hmm.
the same aim of looking after Ethera and humanity and the clans and all that kind of stuff, but he warped it in his own head. And again, another common thing that I've seen really shine towards the end of this book, and especially in chapters 11 and 13.
Yeah, that's a great point. There's it. It's also interesting. Like now that you bring that up, it made me think the Etenmere shamans, they're holding on to this source of power, but to what end, right? Like the Koreani have some higher motive apparently that will maybe help them get off the
Mhm.
planet and regain technology. So it feels like a far-reaching, human-wide scale that they're fighting for. But the Etenmere group is pretty small, and they have power only over this group. Like, they don't allow outsiders, they don't go out themselves. So they're hoarding this power just for the fact of having it, which
Yeah. Well, that's like
yeah,
any
yeah, exactly.
power holding entity is going to want to hold on to that power.
Mhm.
But it's like it's very interesting because they whenever a change occurs in the means of power and how it is obtained, they don't change in how they deal with having that power and how in like in how, they don't change their circumstances to adapt to that to those
Mm,
changes. They're still trying to hold on to a means that they traditionally know how to do it, and they keep that, and they don't adapt to the
yeah.
actual changes that are happening to what they're wielding and stuff, and so it that which is very typical
Mm,
to organizations and cults
yeah.
throughout history.
Yep.
How long did it take the Catholic Church to adapt to things? How long did it take other, even governments and industries and stuff? How long did it take them to adapt to the changes in going on in the world? And they
Mm,
didn't, and they either
Yeah.
failed or became insular like this. And so it's very clever how Janny did that
yeah.
with all the organizations here, the Coriani, the even the Fellowship Sorcerers
Yeah.
Yeah.
have their stubbornness,
Hmm.
in some cases, and it's really cool how she really like in the uh the lore of this world. It's so deep, you know,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
it feels so true. It's just really cool.
Yeah, this feels like a great metaphor, the Etenmere group. I think for you know how you sometimes go to extremes in a lot of science fiction books or fantasy even. You take the extreme version of an example to show how similarly ridiculous like the things that we tend to accept are. So this Etenmere shaman group, for how insular they are, how much power they are holding on to, for in my opinion how little end, and and so on. Like, it's everybody fighting for their place in the world or holding on to their power, like you said, Jared, and that's essentially what is. I might leave the Fellowship Sorcerers out of that particular equation, just because they have, what is it, the dragons told them what to do and
Yeah.
they kind of have
Mm.
to. But the Koreani, for instance, like, you might feel like that's acceptable, but essentially it's a lot of what they're doing, especially now with Lyrenda, is holding on desperately to power and consolidating it.
Yeah, it's that idea that power corrupts. We even seen it with the Sabradin brothers and Alistair
Yeah,
and
exactly.
Thor
Yeah.
and Sturmford. It's like it's happened time and time and again throughout this entire series with various people on both sides of the divide or the
Yeah.
conflict or the fight or whatever way you want to do it. But like I say, it just came into such stark focus here because all these events and all these people were conspiring against Darathan
Mm,
essentially to kind of form up and do this thing, playing their own individual parts. Some of them very openly, the Coriani and the True Sect actually having an alliance to further
Yeah.
both of their individual aims, and then other people like the Ettenmere Shamans, etc., who just happen to sit on the side. But I thought what was really interesting for me about it were the kind of people who were sitting at the sideline actually pointing it out. The truth tellers, like when Vivette was complaining about how she was basically going to throw away her life and leave it all behind. And her brother, wasn't it her brother, was basically saying, look, you've forgotten where you come from, who you are. That's not a life. And similarly, further on with Lysair, I hate to bring it up, but these Evans are pretty good at that kind of conversation as well. Diaz is the person that keeps Lysair on the straight and narrow again about the bigger picture for it. So these kind of truth tellers within the story, I think, were very important for resetting kind of people's raw emotions and all of that kind of stuff. So
That was just a big rambling excuse for Evan Stan Love. That's all that was.
honestly, just the true heroes, the true heroes. I actually thought for one point Arathon being dead would give actually Dace the rightful place to ascend in the final book to take over and be the actual proper hero of this entire series. I thought that was definitely a possibility.
With the return from Sulfin event from Beyond the Veil, or just are you
Well,
happy with Dace?
Dace will be fine. The Evans just have a lot to speak for, that kind of
Okay,
stuff. But
okay.
but Sulfin did get a mention, but that
You got to mention. Yeah.
people have to keep on being reminded how important Sulfin was.
All right, all right.
Meanwhile, all right. So Arathon takes off with Valiant,
This
and
event, yeah.
Yvette, and the sorcerers. What do they do? They did something in the next section, that knife's edge section there. They were talking about, they were predicting like the witch's involvement later on or something like that.
Yeah, I think they're waiting for the thing that happened. If it does happen, that would allow them to save Arathon. I think. Like, mostly my recollection of the Fellowship Sorcerers is them pacing and trying not to interfere.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, throughout this whole thing, it is this idea we still are not going to interfere. We're still going to hold true to the promise.
Oh, that's right. Sethvir witnessed Lorenda's unpleasant instructions to the sister house Pyrrhus at Danefall, which is the witch, of course, who unwittingly helped Arathon escape.
Yeah,
earlier on in the book.
On.
Yeah. So, they witnessed that, and Arathon then, he's taken off and uses his little buddy Ayats again, and which of course leads to Vivette saying he's a shadow sorcerer, evil, dealing with demons and stuff.
Well, it's a shadow sorcerer. I mean, that bit's true.
So that was cool. Very cool stuff.
Yes. Did we already get to the part where? Oh damn! I forgot what I was going to say. Something interesting happens that I forgot.
Something
we can move on. I'll try and remember. As we were talking about the Fellowship Sorcerer, I remembered something that I wanted to bring up and then I forgot. I started my sentence before reminding myself. So we can move on. I will remember.
Yeah. Well, in chapter 12, where we're reminded once again, right at the beginning, that imagination exceeds limitation. And which, of course, is a pretty common theme that's running through the whole series, really.
Yes.
And I feel is a general excellent statement for fantasy literature. But so that's Janny wearing her heart on her sleeve right there. And I totally agree. But so Alara is trying to infiltrate the sect once again. Because it's all coming to a head, right? That she's trying to get these guys in.
Put herself in position.
Put herself in position, right? Yeah. And of course, Dakar the whole time was like, "It's not gonna work." Or, so very interesting stuff. Very interesting stuff.
I remember Terence found his father, or Alara found his father for him.
Yes, that's true. Yeah, when they infiltrated, they found his father. Yeah.
I love the little happy ending this family got at the end of this book. It totally warmed my heart.
It was fantastic. Dad returns home, and that was. You're right. You're absolutely right. That was very, very nice, very beautiful,
and different from the other books, because I know we're at the end of a an arc here, but we don't normally get wrap-ups of what happened to the characters before we do a
Mm.
time jump and move on. Like, that is not something
Yeah.
that normally happens, but I thought it stood out that we did get that, and it was sort of teased in chapter 12
Yeah.
or otherwise, at that
Mm.
point, so it makes sense.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it was
And-
it was teased in this chapter. Yeah.
Mhm.
And it was nicely parenthetical in a way, because we started Initiate's trial with this family. So
That's right.
among the last news items we got, it was okay. They've been through the ringer, but they are happy again. It's fine. Well, they weren't happy to start. They were mourning the deaths of several family members, but now they have something to find joy in again.
Yeah, a wonderful capstone to this story arc.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dad did his part to help cover for them, so he did his fatherly duty there.
Yes, and he also had some nice fatherly moments with Terrence. I
Mhm.
think, I don't know. Did he? I think I was anticipating him. Like, was he scolding him about something he was up to? And then, but like he acknowledged that this is something that Terrence had to do, and then they moved on. But I thought that was nice. It was a nice little quiet family moment.
Yeah, it was good. In my my notebook here, I actually wrote, "What a good dad."
Dad goes, there you go. Yeah.
What a good dad.
Wait, did we know that he even
It-
existed and or was alive? I guess they knew he was off in a battle, right?
Yeah, but I think they were sort of teased that he was probably dead. He hadn't come back and he went off. I think that they were sort of left by themselves. They're hoping that he'd come back, but at that time it seemed only important that he just wasn't on the scene,
Yeah.
to provide guidance and stuff. But that's my recollection of it anyway.
Okay. Yeah.
Hmm.
Fair enough.
But
And
could be wrong.
I'm very curious about how Ilera found him, but I'm just glad that she did.
She's got skills.
Yeah, she's got skills.
She's got mad skills. Yeah.
Maybe like DNA matching, there is some resonant equivalent of it that Ilera was able to use and find the guy. But she seemed to know that there was already someone there because she went. Oh, maybe she was hoping to find the other people and then ended up meeting this guy instead. Anyway, in today's episode of the things that nobody cares about.
But also in chapter 12, poor Arthur.
Yeah. Well,
Gets captured.
He gets captured. And it was interesting because he falls into a trap, and your favorite hot mess Lorenda uses his very music against him. Like,
Yeah.
she's been holding on to
Yes.
that ever since Grand Conspiracy. She's been holding on to that for 200 and something years, and finally uses his own music against him. I was like, wow, that is some deep level hate there.
Yeah.
And directed at it, all her hatred towards Moria. I imagine she would have just, if she had let her loose, she would have continued being servile to her. But let's redirect everything I have to Arathon. Anyway, she bugs me.
But
if you couldn't tell.
Yeah. But she also succeeded on her second try, whereas Moriel / Sletty, tried and
That's
tried
true.
and tried and tried and tried and tried
That's
and
true.
tried and had backup plans upon backup plans and couldn't get shit done. And
Moriel succeeded in keeping him for 200 years.
that's true.
So,
But what should do with that 200 years? Did nothing.
yeah, you're right.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He was just serving the fellowship in a very inefficient way because they lose the free rates. One
Where
mile.
is Janny? Where is Janny? That's all I gotta tell you.
Exploded into a million pieces. Thank you very much.
I set you up for that one, Varsha. I'm building bridges again. Here we go.
Thank you, Chris. Appreciate it. But it's not nearly
Not a
enough.
Yeah.
But yeah, I was gonna say, I think she also seems to know when to sort of back off and let things take their course, because in the end she's like, yeah, when he wakes up and finds out what the fellowship sacrificed to get him alive, he's not gonna be happy. Like, we'll just let that play out on its own. I'm not gonna
Yeah.
bother
Well,
with it.
that's actually
Mm.
cool because she said, well, this was when poor Vivette makes her last stand, right? She dies at the and this magic that kills her from the examiner there. He claps his palm on the crown of her head and snuffs
Oh
out her
yes,
life
yes, yes.
like a candle. And I was just like, damn, that's
Yeah,
mean.
that was
Uh,
brutal. Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, I was like, damn, Vivette. I mean, she did a lot
But
of bad things, but
she did. But around that time, we get this kind of like a scene that I really enjoyed was Arthur confronting about the fact that he knew she was bound to
yeah,
the Coriani and giving her the
yep.
chance to explain herself, and it doesn't quite happen. But you sort of feel like she's got more to tell, and she's still right to the very end bound to a promise and an oath to a person that is no longer alive. And I kind of thought that was a bit strange because obviously the oath and stuff was made with Saletti and obviously through a crystal. But with Saletti being no longer there, I thought there might have been a way for her to circumvent that. But obviously, the old hand on the top of the head putting into that fairly sharpish. Now
Yeah.
you do feel a waste, here in terms of like the very Cullen nature, and I think it's a nice contrast to how we felt as readers compared to how the people felt when Arthur was killed at the end. When the way that's described, I think I felt the same about Vivette's death as was described later on. And I think that's a nice parallel to draw between two of them about the total nonsensical death.
Yeah, and it's kind of ironic because Arathon laid down the law, said, "Hey, you're staying here with the
Yeah.
kid. I got to go out and do this stuff." And I think at that point she was like, "Yeah, okay, all right, you got me. I'll do what you say." And then of course the true sect comes in, steals a kid, and now she dies because of it. And but she did spit in their faces a little bit at the end there.
But she didn't.
She's
She didn't a little bit. She actually spat in their faces, which was actually great.
and so she had a last act of defiance, so to speak. The mouse giving the finger to the eagle, and
And yeah, she spoke truth to power, is what she did. Like,
yeah, right,
basically called them out, and again set up this kind of idea that they had abused their power and twisted their power, and were kind of using it for nefarious means, which we knew about, but also not enough characters in this story have done that throughout,
right,
or had the chance to do that.
But that's yeah. So that was pretty damn cool, and
Yeah.
yeah, and it, and to Vasha's point later on, when Lorenda says, "Yeah, we're gonna let Arathon stew," and let him take it out on the sorcerers, because the Seven's betrayal of a child will surely provoke the reinstated scion into a vehement estrangement. That was the line, I think. Yeah, you were remembering, Vasha, and so that's interesting tactic by Lorenda there, which differs from what we've seen from Moriel's 500-year need for vengeance or whatever.
Yeah.
The act of preventing her downfall brought it about. Seems
Yeah.
always. There were a few things that I really liked about that whole scene where before they were to be burnt at the stake. One was, I guess, the reminder that Arathon's base resonance has changed. So he didn't have the strength to, because they were bleeding him, but he could have gotten himself out of it, because I guess the resonance that was in the song that Lyrenda used was ever so slightly different because he's been fundamentally changed since Selkwood. I thought that was brilliant, and I hope that comes to play again later. But just in and of itself, that idea that someone has undergone such a shift that they are a completely different person now, even if just ever so slightly.
Also, has been alive for like 300 years, though. You know?
That too. So there's, and then when he tries to save Valiant, not save, I think ease his passing. I thought that was really poignant. And
so this is a good question, actually. I think he thought that he was saving him by naming him, or letting clan law. Wasn't that what he thought? And was it some of the fellowship were saying actually that's not going to work here, but he thinks that's what's happening, even though it played out for another thing towards the end. It actually allowed them to interfere further in line because the death of the Rathian heir died.
Naming him name as heir to the throne of Rathan, that would prompt the fellowship to act on. But he lacked one important piece of information.
Yeah.
And the fellowship were willing to, do what they did, which was nothing.
But before that, before he tried that, he tried to just say his name, I think, somehow to protect him. I don't remember. Oh, I guess at that point he wasn't trying to ease his passing. Maybe it was afterwards.
Disassociate him from any pain. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
But it didn't work, so he's just...
You were right, I was wrong.
Yeah. So he needed to pass... So that was the other interesting detail, that for them to take advantage of this, the spirit needed to have passed the veil, so before they can intervene and whisk Arathorn away. Yeah, that was everything. Like, that was a really cool scene in terms of the exposition around some of the magic. But sad,
just
very sad otherwise.
Before we get there, I thought that the end of chapter 12 was chilling in a lot of ways, because we obviously got Arathorn met the sister who had met beforehand and who cut his ties and his bow, but actually just opened up his veins at that stage. I thought that was a really chilling scene to end a chapter and kind of set things up, because it sort of gave you, again, he wasn't dead or killed at that time, but it gave the sense that actually he is likely to die here, or he's likely to be killed. It's going to happen. So it was like this kind of sense of foreboding that actually you may have thought that he was just going to save himself, but actually there's a pretty good chance that he'll die.
Yeah. And especially because of the sense of doom that Dakar has been promoting throughout. Yeah.
But to be fair, Dakar's been doom and gloom for 10 books now. He hasn't exactly been the guy that's been going, God, let's go out for a party, lads. We've got plenty to celebrate. Well, he's always been at a tavern drinking himself to a stupor.
Right, that's the celebration right there.
Oh dear.
Oh man, yeah, they leached him pretty good, huh? They leaked him pretty good. That was, you're right. That was pretty brutal. That bleeding him off like that, to keep him weak and keep him. Whew, some of the stuff in here.
Yeah.
Interesting remembrance of when he was 10 years old, and he was. We had a little paragraph there of his.
That's right. Yep.
Getting practicing his mastery and his not making mistakes and being under duress while having to use this stuff. That right there, that's how you do a flashback right there.
Yeah.
So that was...
I did read that earlier on. I thought of you, Jared. There is no doubt. I was like, okay, this is
Yeah,
This is what one of those.
that's how you do it. That's good stuff right there.
It's
Yeah.
it's nice when you read books that annoy you. It increases your appreciation for the
Absolutely,
books that you like.
Mhm.
Oh man.
absolutely. Yeah, and that was so tense. That whole section where he proclaims Valiant as his heir
Mm.
and Sephir bears witness, like that's kind of like a granted type of thing.
What was
Yeah,
Done
he
and
jumped
Done,
in a
wasn't
little
that?
too quickly. Yeah.
Yeah,
Done
done
and
and
Done.
done. Yeah,
Yeah.
that was just that was so that was high drama right there. I was just like,
Yeah.
yes,
But it was like the Done and Done was almost with glee in some ways
yeah,
because there was an excitement building about it, and whether you realized what was going on or not, you would have sensed the glee or the excitement from Sephir at the fact that was going to know actually there's plenty going on here.
yeah. The response was charged and swift, and he's like star stamped and sealed into record, and I'm just like, that is
Great stuff.
fantastic,
Yeah.
fantastic stuff.
Yeah. And the other thing before we actually get to the final events, one of the things that I thought again was great. Again, we're 10 books in here. There's been so much lore building and so much just explaining of what happens in the world. Everything that happened from the death onwards, I knew was going to happen in some form or another. Because the Arthur's death means this, means this, means this. I might not know exactly the particulars about how it was going to happen, but I understood the world well enough because I remember when we were talking Curse of the Strath, I'm pretty sure I had said the idea that one of the ways that the curse would be lifted was through death. Now, what I thought at the time was that Arthur would be killed or Lesser be killed, and rather just before they died, the curse would be broken just before they died and they'd come back to life. That's what I thought it was going to happen. But it was when we got to the stage and Arthur dies, I knew that would have the knock-on effect of actually on Lysair then, because I was like, I'm desperate to see what's happening with Lysair, and obviously the middle chapter, or otherwise takes you directly to him and Dace at that stage. And then also about how Arthur's dead, but he's also under the spell of a 500-year fountain promise from Davian, which will have had some effect. I knew that was the reason that it was going to be, because that was all very much set up, not just through Arthur and Lysair, but also through Allura's promise and that kind of stuff. It's been reinforced time and time again throughout the story, and I love how all of that kind of paid off in this bit, insofar as like I didn't know exactly the particulars, but I knew the mechanisms by which it would happen, because I've known and we've discussed this world at length and these stories in depth and that kind of stuff, to the point that you understand what way this world works a bit now. And that's why one of the reasons why the next book's going to be completely bittersweet. And I'm sure Chibi kind of has this feeling as well when he reads it, of like, yes, I understand this world and I don't really want to see the end of it, but also I don't want to not exist in this world, because I do understand it a bit more now than I did 5, 6 books ago, 7 books ago. And that's the exciting part.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that's what we read these for. That big picture, that feeling right there, and at the same time, we're getting these neat little action sequences.
Oh yeah, absolutely,
interspersed throughout. It's really
so
a great
cool.
balance. Yeah. So I wrote a note in my notebook here, and I just I was reading the part where Takar was saying, was getting Terrans to help him steady Alaric, because at all costs we can't break down and react, because he couldn't allow her to interfere with the prophecy. And I wrote in my notes, damn all prophecy. I was just like, and because then Valiant gets killed, and that's like heartbreaking, and then Arathon gets killed soon after. But what I loved is they finally broke out and started, like, there was actually a fight breaking out, around the body and stuff like that. And I love that they beat the hell out of the hatchet. That was great. And Dakar actually steps on his hand and stuff.
Yeah, broke
Like,
his hands. Yeah,
that that was outstanding. And but and I wrote down, I was in the mode of the book, and I wrote down, "May Ath forgive these damn sorcerers, indeed, for letting a child die in place of Arathon." I was just like,
Yeah.
yeah, there is something that is so that doesn't sit well about this prophecy, and what is right and wrong, and you understand that the sorcerers have their mandate, but it's just like
Yeah, there's something twisted about it. The only thing that would have made that more apt is if you'd written it down in Peruvian, Jared.
Oh, I'll have to try that. I gotta try to translate that.
You know, if you're speaking in tongues, like you were communicating in the language of the book, but if you'd done it in Peruvian, it would have been right on point.
Yeah, but then it might have changed the book, so who knows?
Well, that's true. You don't want to don't be messing about with that stuff. That's
I
true.
mean, yeah, I don't want to mess around with that stuff. Man.
Yeah, I pronounce you, Keith, then. But yeah, the events actually after that. I mean, again, how Janny deals with momentous death again in this book, it's really interesting. I mean, we had the death of Solari, somebody who we've been looking for ages, but as we said before, tinged that with sadness because literally everybody else in the room had to die with her. You know, and this kind of a lot of innocent lives led. And we have the death of Arathon here, and we're very keen to, mourn him. We see Allura who's standing there going, "But I have this dagger, and I feel helpless and useless. Like I never get to use the dagger, and this person I love's gun thing." But then a lot of the aftermath of the death is spent looking at the impact of the normal people who were watching, the rabid crowd, and talking about how they felt not just unfulfilled, but they felt guilt, and they felt like this was the big threat that that's been talked about our entire lives, that we've been told fire and brimstone would come down from the sky and all the rest of it, and none of that happened. It was just a small, inconsequential man and a child that were killed in front of our eyes. And actually how that witness to that event actually took away all of the true sex power, and how that was left with. I thought that was so poignant and so brilliant and really thought-provoking in a period of time where we should have been having other thoughts within the book, because this is book 10. The central character of the book has been stabbed and killed, and whether he's actually physically dead or not, you would have thought that the whole thing would have been about let's save him and all the rest. But a lot of time was spent about the people looking on, even to the point at the end of chapter 13 where they just talk about the four people walking and the kind of making the way down the line, which was beautifully written, honestly, especially the ending in Allura and the fact that she's tear-strained, and it was just so beautifully handled, I think, in a way that didn't kind of take away the momentum of the story and what was going, but dealt with actually the aftermath of when you do public displays of execution and all of that kind of stuff. What actually happens? The true sect think it's going to strengthen their power, but it actually stripped it all away from them, and they were done at that stage.
Yeah, that was the section reprieve, right? Or was that? Yeah, unbelievable.
Yeah.
No, Last Vigil. That's what.
Oh, Last Vision. Yeah. I'm just looking at that. Yeah, Last Vigil. Yeah. Fantastic. But in the middle, of course, we had Dace and Lysair.
Yes, and Lysair, of course, comes to the realization that it's gone. It's gone.
Yeah. And I've been a dick.
And I'm a dick. Yeah.
I love that he woke up with tears streaming down his eyes because his half brother is dead and he's desperately mourning him.
Yeah.
But also he's bracing for the fact that he could come back, and we know that this is true because the other time the curse was lifted was in Stormed Fortress, I think, when Arathon had locked himself inside Alethea, right? And he had basically his spirit has disappeared from the planet for a bit, or from this realm for a bit, and Lysair was relieved of the curse, and I think that allowed him some perspective. Now when he comes back, I think we'll know that it will still affect Lysair again, but
do you think so?
I was unsure. I put a big question mark about that because I'm not really sure. Is he free? And is it? I put a big question mark next to that because I don't know how permanent this is. If, like you said,
But-
Vasha, if Arathon comes back,
But he has died. Is basically
Yeah.
his things.
yeah,
Jesus, oh, I
yeah.
know.
Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks a lot.
I know. So, but it does raise the question, because the purpose of the curse was to see the mutual destruction of each other, or the death of each other, and death has happened.
Yeah.
So
That's the
what?
question. Though. Yeah.
So my question is this death different from the other time he crossed over the veil with the Kralovir cult, right? And I guess we didn't really get a perspective on what that did to Lysair. But we know there was one other time when Arathon's spirit wasn't here, which allowed Lysair's curse to be lifted for a bit. Uh, but I forget if the mechanics of that was different. Was it because he just wasn't there, or was it Alethiel doing something? I forget.
It was a combination with the influence of a lethal had penetrated the effects of the curse, and Arathon went spirit walking so that his presence wouldn't exacerbate, the existing, and undo all that, effort.
Got it. So Alethiel played a role in that. That makes sense. So
Correct.
okay, this is very different than from what because
What happened then?
I really wanted this to be the end of it, but it felt like, based on those other two times, because even without the Alethiel one, the Kralovir one, he did cross the veil. Again, we don't know how different that is from this instance. He may or may not come back, but I think there is a question mark there, though. Like it is a
for sure.
possibility, and Lysair seems convinced that if he does come back, but he's probably not aware. He probably thinks he's grievously injured, not the, but maybe not the actual death part of it. He's probably not aware.
I just say my half brother is dead, isn't it? Isn't that?
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, he felt felt what he thought was him passing the veil. All I will say is, we discussed the 5 centuries fountain and everything, and what the sorcerers, doing their thing to after the unfortunate expedient act involving Valian, is even if he had crossed the veil, Lysair would still, hasn't, had gone through an experience of having the curse itself expunged from his being. So
right. I get you. So the
so
curse
he would
is
still
still
be-
present. It's just not activated.
Yeah, it would
Oh,
go
the curse,
like
yeah.
Quisient, and but a mention of Arathon or whatnot would probably set it off.
Yeah. And just like the wraith itself, still trapped in Rockvale at this stage. It didn't disappear just because. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Cool.
But I will also say this: there will be a lot of Lysair in the next book.
Makes sense.
Lots and lots.
Nice. I'm looking forward to that. I would like to see some good Lysair. Hopefully, it's good Lysair, not the Lysair curse bound
Look,
Lysair.
you have been an apologist for Lysair from book 1, Portia. This does not surprise me in the slightest of your team Lysair kind of.
That's true. See, right now, Lysair is at a place where I feel very justified in being an apologist.
Yeah.
All right.
I might have to give you that.
So we got the the final news items. Actually, is
Yes.
a whole year goes by,
Mhm.
and
So that
the
was
first
interesting.
one just tells us about the true sect just dying out.
Yep.
It's like,
Which
yeah,
I thought was interesting, because again, the middle chapter of chapter 13 was about Dace and Lysair basically heading up to kind of take them down. If you know what I mean, that was kind of going to be his focus.
Yeah.
And yet, by the time it got to the end of the book, it was already gone. You know, without their interference, just because of their own actions. So, but I thought that was really interesting to do narratively.
Yeah. So that we get that, and then we get of course the return of is it Salatus or Calatus?
Yes.
Yeah. Who's just makes just says, "Oh, I got some new stuff for you."
Got some books for you.
Chibi will blink twice if we'll also get a lot of Killadis in the next book.
The one who's most like Arathon, you know, the two become one.
Yes.
Yeah, beside the fact you'll need help with the storm on the hour Prince Arathon awakens.
Which is interesting because I would have guessed Davian for Arathon, like who's most like Arathon.
Yeah.
By the way, did Killadis say that Davian picked someone too, or did he abstain from it all?
Davian and I believe it was Luhane were the two who didn't pick. Davian because he didn't agree, and I think if I remember right,
because he couldn't make up his mind.
Luhane, kind of contemplated about it forever, and
that was funny though. I can't decide.
Yeah, Davian to be different because that's his MO. Yeah,
exactly. Okay.
Yeah.
But Killadis is back.
Yes.
But yes, I did want to say I like the, the bit, in the three snippets at the end where, anybody who witnessed this, they're like, yes, the Master of Shadow is dead, but everybody who witnessed it, turned apostate to the true sect, and they're like, yeah, we're burying this information.
Yeah, one of those classic things where there were thousands and thousands of people there, but nobody would ever admit to being there. Events in history like that.
But we know that this religion has survived in some form into the next stage, right? Because of the prologue of Curse of the Mystery.
They will endure and persist, and we're not quite done with them yet. They'll be around in the next book too.
Yeah, I mean this iteration of it was called the True Sect.
Yeah, that's right.
But it was something that got transformed from the Alliance of Light into something different. So it makes sense that something else would come out of this eventually. Yeah.
This was very reminiscent of say the wiping out of pagan religions, or with I think Christianity was like there was a scene where I think Vivette calls upon some local goddess, and the True Sect examiner is like, how dare you call upon some other god, whereas this god is 300 years old, their new god, and that was a god of the I guess that they were worshipping for longer than that, but
very cool.
Anything else before we wrap up?
No.
So, Chris, you're our schedule setter. Approximately when do you think we'll start Song of the Mysteries?
Well, if we are 2 weeks for a conversation with Janny, we start the next week. Straight after that, I would imagine. I'll be 3 weeks before we start. Yeah, 3 weeks to start, because let's be honest, I think most of us are going to start this fairly.
Yeah.
Sharpish.
I'm reading. I've got a bunch of stuff to read that is preventing me from picking it up tonight. But I'd be very surprised if I don't at least read a couple of pages. In fact, I may have already peeked into the first chapter. But
maybe.
Maybe.
We know you did.
The dust jacket is off. It's sitting on my tea table in the living room. It's just, and this one I'm not going to read on the Kindle, so I need more time because I don't have a thing telling me how much longer each chapter is going to take. So, yes, the book I've been waiting to read for a year, as I suppose is true for both of you too. Chibi has read it twice already, so he's not really waiting for it. But
I will read it again.
Oh yes.
I think I'm pretty sure I've read it more than twice. But
wait, have you read it twice or just the once? You read the Arc too, right?
Yeah, I read it. I think I've lost count of how many times I read it.
Wow. Okay.
Like,
The Song of the Mysteries too.
I read song. Well, I know I haven't read like it as much as some of the others, but I read it once. Once I got it, and then well, actually, the first time I read it was when she's like, "Here's the," you know, uh, when I got the preview from her
Mm-hmm.
at the convention, and then I read it again. So I think I've 3 times total.
Wow. Okay. I thought I was
Physical
overestimating
copy, but yeah.
twice, but 3 times sounds about right. And now for a fourth time
Yeah.
in a couple of weeks
It's such a
only.
short book. Like,
Yeah.
yeah.
Such a short book. Only going to take us 3 months to read it.
Piece of
But
cake.
it's going to be 3 months that we'll get to savor the book in. It's 18 chapters, so it breaks down nicely to 3 chapters every 2 weeks
Oh,
or a week.
Nice.
I
Mhm.
like it. I like it.
So, yeah. So, thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you with the next one. Bye.